What if everything you think you know about time is completely wrong? What if people from the future have already walked among us, left behind evidence, and even warned us about what's coming? Sounds impossible, right? But here's the thing. There are documented cases, photographs, witness testimonies, and physical evidence that skeptics still cannot explain. People who appeared out of nowhere with technology that didn't exist. Travelers who described future events with terrifying accuracy. Objects that simply should not be where they were found. If you believe time travel is just science fiction, then we challenge you to explain the 15 cases you're about to see. These aren't vague stories passed down through rumors. These are specific incidents with names, dates, and details that have baffled researchers for decades. So, let's jump straight into the first one. And trust us, this one will make you question everything you thought was real. In 1943, a short promotional film was shot inside a factory in Massachusetts, showing workers assembling equipment for the war effort. The footage sat forgotten in archives for nearly 70 years until someone digitized it and uploaded it online. That's when viewers noticed something that made absolutely no sense. One of the workers, a young woman walking past the camera, appears to be holding a thin rectangular object pressed against her ear, exactly like someone talking on a smartphone. Her posture, her expression, even the way she angles her head matches perfectly with how we use mobile phones today. But here's the problem. This was 1943. Portable phones didn't exist. Wireless communication devices small enough to fit in your hand wouldn't be invented for another 40 years. So, what exactly was this woman holding, and why does she look like she's having a conversation on it? The footage was originally created by the DuPont Corporation as an internal promotional film, highlighting their contribution to the American war effort. Factories like this one were running day and night, producing everything from parachutes to explosives. Thousands of women had entered the workforce to replace men who had gone to fight overseas. The film was meant to boost morale and showcase American industrial might. It was never intended for public release, which is exactly what makes it so fascinating. This wasn't staged entertainment. It was raw, candid footage of everyday factory life in the middle of World War II. The clip in question lasts only a few seconds. Workers move through the frame, going about their tasks. Then, a young woman walks past the camera from left to right, and this is where things get extremely strange. She's holding something small and rectangular against her left ear. Her lips are moving as if she's speaking. Her facial expression suggests she's listening to a response. She walks with the casual confidence of someone engaged in a phone conversation, completely unbothered by her surroundings. It's a gesture so familiar to us today that we wouldn't look twice if we saw it on the street. But in 1943, that gesture simply did not exist. Now, here's where it gets even more unsettling. When you freeze the frame and look closely at the object in her hand, it doesn't match anything that existed in that era. It's thin, it's flat, it appears to have a smooth surface. The first handheld mobile phone wasn't invented until 1973, and it was the size of a brick. The sleek smartphone design we recognize today didn't emerge until 2007 with the first iPhone. So, how is a woman in 1943 casually walking through a factory, holding what appears to be technology from 60 years in the future? Skeptics have offered several explanations. Some suggest she might be holding a compact mirror, adjusting her hair as she walks. Others propose it could be an early portable hearing aid, though hearing devices from the 1940s were bulky units worn on the body with wires running to earpieces. Nothing like what appears in the footage. A few have speculated it might be a small radio receiver, but again, portable radios of that era were far too large to hold against your ear with one hand. None of these explanations fully account for her posture, her moving lips, or the way she appears to be actively engaged in two-way communication. And then there's the other theory, the one that sounds absolutely insane until you actually watch the footage yourself. What if this woman was a time traveler? What if someone from our era, or even further in the future, found themselves transported back to 1943 and was caught on camera before they realized they were being filmed? It would explain the device. It would explain the gesture. It would explain why she looks so completely natural, doing something that no one in 1943 should know how to do. Think about it for a moment. If you were suddenly transported to the past, how long would it take before you instinctively reach for your phone out of habit? It's such an automatic behavior for us now that we don't even think about it. Could this woman have made exactly that mistake? the footage remains available online for anyone to analyze. Frame by frame, second by second, the mystery only deepens the closer you look. To this day, no one has definitively identified the woman or the object she was holding. No one has provided an explanation that satisfies every detail in the clip. So, what do you think? Was this simply an innocent woman holding a compact mirror or some forgotten 1940s gadget? Or did a camera in a Massachusetts factory accidentally capture proof that time travelers walk among us? And if it happened once, caught purely by accident, how many other moments like this have gone completely unnoticed? On August 19th, 1995, thousands of fans packed into a Las Vegas arena to watch Mike Tyson fight Peter McNeely. The event was filmed from multiple angles and broadcast around the world. Decades later, when the footage resurfaced online, eagle-eyed viewers spotted something deeply unsettling in the crowd. A man sitting ringside appears to be holding up a device and recording the fight. But this wasn't a camcorder from the 90s. The object in his hands looks exactly like a modern smartphone, thin, rectangular, with what appears to be a camera lens pointed directly at the ring. In 1995, smartphones simply did not exist. The first iPhone wouldn't be released until 2007, a full 12 years later. So, how is it possible that this man is casually filming with technology that hadn't been invented yet? Some say it must be a different device, but when you look at the footage yourself, the resemblance is absolutely unmistakable. The fight itself was a massive event. This was Mike Tyson's first match after being released from prison, and the entire world was watching. The MGM Grand Garden Arena was packed with over 16,000 screaming fans. Celebrities filled the ringside seats. Pay-per-view sales shattered records. Every major network had cameras positioned throughout the venue to capture the action from every possible angle. The fight lasted only 89 seconds before Tyson demolished his opponent, but those 89 seconds were immortalized on film forever. And hidden within that footage was something that wouldn't be noticed for nearly 2 decades. Now, imagine the scene. It's 1995. If you wanted to record something, you brought a camcorder. These were bulky, heavy devices that you held with 2 hands and pressed against your face to look through the viewfinder. They recorded onto VHS tapes or Chai 8 cassettes. They were impossible to miss in a crowd. But the device this man is holding is nothing like that. He's gripping it casually with one hand, holding it out in front of him at arm's length, exactly the way you would hold a smartphone to record video today. The posture is unmistakable. It's a gesture that didn't exist in 1995 because the technology to make it possible hadn't been invented yet. Here's where it gets even stranger. When you zoom in on the footage, you can see the device has a bright, glowing screen facing away from the man and toward the ring. In 1995, no consumer device had a screen on the back that would glow while recording. Camcorders had small viewfinders you looked through, not outward-facing displays. Digital cameras with LCD screens existed, but they were rare, expensive, and didn't look anything like what appears in this footage. The object this man is holding has the exact proportions, the exact shape, and the exact functionality of a smartphone recording video. Pretty insane when you think about it. Skeptics have tried desperately to explain this away. Some suggest it could be a disposable camera, but disposable cameras were small, held horizontally, and required you to look through a viewfinder. Others propose it might be an early digital camera or a Palm Pilot device, but none of these match what we see in the footage. The way he's holding it, the angle of his arm, the glowing screen facing outward, it all points to one thing: a smartphone, a device that simply could not exist in August of 1995. And then there's the question that haunts everyone who has studied this clip. If this man really did travel back in time, why would he go to a boxing match? Think about it for a second. If you had access to time travel, would you use it to watch an 89-second fight? Unless, of course, there was something significant about this exact moment in history. Something we don't yet understand. Or maybe, just maybe, time travelers aren't visiting major historical events. Maybe they're blending into crowds at concerts, sports games, and public gatherings where they won't be noticed, where one person holding up a strange device won't raise any alarms. The footage has been analyzed frame by researchers and skeptics alike. To this day, no one has been able to definitively identify the device or the man holding it. He was never interviewed. He was never tracked down. He remains completely anonymous, frozen in time on a piece of footage that wasn't supposed to reveal anything extraordinary. So, what do you believe? Was this just a man with some obscure 1990s gadget that happens to look exactly like a smartphone? A bizarre coincidence that defies all probability? Or did someone from the future slip into that Las Vegas crowd in 1995, pull out their phone out of habit, and accidentally get caught on camera? And if they made that mistake once, in full view of thousands of people and dozens of cameras, how many other times have they done it without anyone noticing? On a warm June evening in 1950, something impossible happened in the middle of Times Square, New York City. Witnesses reported that a man suddenly appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the street, looking completely disoriented and terrified. Seconds later, he was struck and killed by a passing taxi. When police examined his body, they found items that made no sense for 1950. Old-fashioned currency, a letter dated 1876, business cards with addresses that no longer existed, and not a single item manufactured after 1876. Investigators eventually identified him as Rudolph Fentz, a man who had mysteriously vanished from New York City in 1876, 74 years earlier, at the exact age he appeared to be when he died. He hadn't aged a single day. The case was quietly filed away, but the questions it raised have never been answered. Did Rudolph Fentz somehow travel through time? And if so, what happened during those 74 missing years? Picture Times Square in 1950. Neon lights blazing, cars honking, thousands of people rushing through one of the busiest intersections on Earth. This was the heart of post-war America, a city exploding with energy and modernity. And right in the middle of it all, a man appeared wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in a museum. Witnesses described him as being in his early 30s, dressed in Victorian-era attire complete with mutton chop sideburns. He stood frozen in the middle of the street, staring at his surroundings with an expression of pure terror. Before anyone could reach him, a taxi came speeding through. The driver never had a chance to stop. When police arrived and began examining the body, what they found sent chills down their spines. In the man's pockets were items that defied all explanation. There was a copper token for a beer worth 5 cents, bearing the name of a saloon that had closed decades ago. There was a bill for the care of a horse and washing of a carriage, charged to a stable on Lexington Avenue that no longer existed. There were business cards bearing the name Rudolph Fentz with an address on Fifth Avenue. And there was a letter, dated 1876, addressed to this same Rudolph Fentz. Not a single item on his body had been manufactured after 1876. No wallet, no modern currency, no identification from the 20th century. It was as if this man had stepped directly out of the 1870s. Now, here's where it gets even more disturbing. A detective named Hubert Ream took personal interest in the case and began digging into historical records. What he discovered was absolutely baffling. He found a Rudolph Fentz listed in the 1876 New York City directory at the exact address shown on the business cards. Further investigation revealed that this Rudolph Fentz had mysteriously vanished one evening in 1876 while taking a walk near his home. He had stepped outside for some air and simply never returned. His family searched for him for years. He was never found. No body, no explanation. He had vanished without a single trace. Detective Ream eventually tracked down the missing man's descendants. He located a woman who had been married to Rudolph Fentz Jr., the son of the vanished man. She confirmed everything. Her father-in-law had disappeared in 1876 at approximately 29 years old. The description matched the man killed in Times Square perfectly. Same age, same physical appearance, same name, same address. The only difference was 74 years of history that this man had somehow skipped over entirely. Think about this for a moment. If the evidence is accurate, Rudolph Fentz walked out of his home in 1876, took a step forward, and landed in 1950. For him, no time had passed at all. But for the rest of the world, nearly 3/4 of a century had gone by. His wife had grown old and died. His son had lived an entire life. The city he knew had transformed beyond recognition. And he stood there in the middle of it, surrounded by strange vehicles and towering buildings, probably not understanding any of it in the seconds before he died. Skeptics have pointed out that the story bears similarities to a science fiction short story published around the same time. Some dismiss the entire case as urban legend, but others argue that the level of detail, the police records, and the genealogical research conducted by Detective Rame point to something genuinely unexplainable. If it was simply fiction, why were the historical records so accurate? Why did the missing person report from 1876 exist? Why did everything align so perfectly? The case of Rudolph Fentz remains one of the most haunting alleged time travel incidents ever recorded. A man who vanished in one century and appeared in another, only to die moments later, alone and terrified in a world he couldn't possibly understand. So, what really happened on that June evening in Times Square? Did Rudolph Fentz accidentally walk through some kind of temporal doorway? Was he pulled forward through time against his will? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, if it happened to him, could it happen to anyone? Could you step outside your door tonight and find yourself stranded 74 years in the future, with no way back and no one who remembers you ever existed? On August 10, 1901, two highly respected English academics, Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, visited the Palace of Versailles in France. What should have been a simple afternoon tour turned into one of the most documented and debated time slip cases in history. As they walked through the gardens searching for the Petit Trianon, both women independently noticed that something felt deeply wrong. The atmosphere became heavy and oppressive. They encountered people dressed in old-fashioned clothing who seemed out of place. A woman sketching near the palace matched historical descriptions of Marie Antoinette herself. Buildings appeared that no longer existed in 1901. When they later compared notes and researched their experience, they discovered with growing horror that everything they had seen matched the gardens exactly as they would have appeared in 1789, over a century earlier. Both women were educated, rational, and had no history of delusions. They published their account under pseudonyms, knowing they would face ridicule. But to their dying days, both insisted they had somehow walked into the past. These were not impressionable teenagers or fantasy-prone individuals looking for attention. Anne Moberly was the daughter of a bishop and served as the principal of St. Hugh's College at Oxford University. Eleanor Jourdain was equally accomplished, a respected educator who would later become Moberly's vice principal. These were serious scholarly women with reputations to protect. They had absolutely nothing to gain from fabricating such a bizarre story. In fact, they had everything to lose. And yet, both women went to their graves, insisting that what they experienced that summer afternoon was completely real. The day began normally enough. The two women were visiting Paris and decided to take a day trip to Versailles to see the famous palace and gardens. After touring the main building, they set off on foot to find the Petit Trianon, a smaller palace on the grounds that had been a favorite retreat of Marie Antoinette. They took a wrong turn and found themselves wandering through an unfamiliar section of the gardens. And that's when everything changed. Both women later described feeling a sudden and overwhelming sense of depression fall over them. The air felt thick and strange. Colors seemed flat and lifeless, like looking at an old painting. They encountered gardeners wearing old-fashioned green coats and tricorn hats. A man with a pockmarked face sat near a gazebo, his expression filled with menace. A running footman appeared seemingly out of nowhere and urgently directed them toward the Petit Trianon. And then came the moment that froze their blood cold. Near the palace, sitting on the grass with a sketchbook, was a woman in an elaborate 18th century dress with a white fichu around her shoulders. She turned and looked directly at them. Her expression was melancholy, almost haunted. Moberly felt an inexplicable wave of sadness wash over her. They hurried past, eventually finding their way to the main building, where the strange atmosphere suddenly lifted. Neither woman spoke about what they had experienced until a week later, when Moberly finally asked if Jourdain thought the Petit Trianon was haunted. That simple question opened a floodgate. When they compared notes, both women realized with growing astonishment that they had seen the same impossible things. Over the following years, they conducted exhaustive historical research. What they discovered was absolutely baffling. The buildings they had seen matched layouts from 1789 that had been demolished long before 1901. The clothing they described was accurate to the late 18th century. The pockmarked man matched descriptions of the Comte de Vaudreuil, a figure from Marie Antoinette's court. And the woman sketching? Her dress, her position, her melancholy expression, all matched accounts of the doomed queen herself in the final summer before the revolution. Skeptics have proposed various explanations over the years. Some suggest the women stumbled upon a costume party or historical reenactment. Others claim they simply had overactive imaginations fueled by heat stroke. A few have pointed out minor inconsistencies between their accounts. But none of these theories explain how two educated women independently observed historically accurate details they could not possibly have known. They had no prior expertise in French Revolutionary fashion or 18th century garden architecture, and yet everything they described checked out. In 1911, they published their account under the title An Adventure, using pseudonyms. The book became a sensation and has never been out of print. Researchers have studied and debated it for over a century. To this day, no one has been able to definitively prove or disprove what happened in those gardens. So, what really occurred on that August afternoon? Did Moberly and Jourdan somehow slip through time and walk the same paths that Marie Antoinette had walked over a century earlier? Did they catch a glimpse of the past, frozen in place like a photograph waiting to be witnessed? Or is there some other explanation that no one has yet considered? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, if two ordinary women could accidentally stumble into another time, how many of us have walked past doorways to the past without ever realizing they were there? In 1943, the U.S. Navy allegedly conducted a top-secret experiment that went catastrophically wrong. According to multiple witnesses who came forward decades later, the USS Eldridge, a naval destroyer, was subjected to powerful electromagnetic fields in an attempt to make it invisible to radar. But something far more terrifying happened instead. The entire ship reportedly vanished from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard and reappeared moments later in Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away. When it returned, crew members were found fused into the metal of the ship itself. Others had gone insane. Some had simply vanished forever. The Navy has always denied the experiment took place. But in the 1980s, a man named Al Bialek came forward with an extraordinary claim. He said he had been one of the sailors on board and that the experiment had actually hurled him forward in time to the year 2137. He described future technology, underground cities, and a drastically changed world. Bialek provided consistent, detailed accounts for years until his death in 2011. Was he telling the truth? Or had something during that experiment permanently altered his mind? The story of the Philadelphia experiment first emerged publicly in 1955, when a man named Carl Allen, using the alias Carlos Allende, sent a series of bizarre letters to astronomer Morris Jessup. Allen claimed to have witnessed the entire event from a nearby ship called the SS Andrew Furuseth. He described seeing the USS Eldridge surrounded by a greenish fog before it completely vanished from sight. When the ship reappeared, Allen wrote, the scene was one of absolute horror. Sailors were screaming, some were on fire. Others had been physically embedded into the steel structure of the ship. Their bodies merged with bulkheads and decks, as if the solid matter had briefly become liquid and then solidified again, with them trapped inside. The Navy dismissed Allen's claims as fantasy, but the story refused to die. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. In 1988, a man named Al Bialek appeared at a UFO conference and made an announcement that stunned everyone present. He claimed that his real name was Edward Cameron and that he had been one of the sailors aboard the USS Eldridge during the fateful experiment. But that wasn't all. Bialek said the electromagnetic fields generated during the test had ripped open a hole in time itself. He and his brother Duncan had jumped overboard during the chaos and found themselves not in the waters of Philadelphia, but in the year 2137. Think about this for a moment. According to Bialek, he spent approximately 6 weeks in 2137 before being sent even further forward to 2749. The world he described was radically transformed. Earth's population had been devastated by wars and environmental catastrophes, reduced to just 300 million people. Survivors lived in underground cities and floating structures. A highly advanced artificial intelligence system governed what remained of human civilization. There was no currency, no conflict, and no disease. Bialek provided incredibly specific details about the technology, the social structure, and even the geography of this future world. He described floating cities along the coastlines of continents that had been reshaped by rising seas. Pretty insane, right? But then came the part that makes this case truly fascinating. Bialik claimed that after his time in the future, he was sent back to 1943 and his memories were completely erased. He was given a new identity, a new family, and a new life as Al Bialik. For over 40 years, he had no idea who he really was. It wasn't until 1988 that his memories suddenly began returning, triggered by watching a movie about the Philadelphia experiment. From that moment on, he dedicated his life to sharing what he had experienced. Skeptics have thoroughly dismantled many of Bialik's claims. Naval records show the USS Eldridge was nowhere near Philadelphia during the alleged time frame. Crew members who served on the ship denied anything unusual ever occurred. Bialik's own timeline contained inconsistencies that researchers were quick to point out. Many believe he was simply an elaborate hoaxer seeking attention, but others aren't so sure. Bialik passed multiple lie detector tests over the years. His descriptions of future events contain details that seem to align with technological developments he couldn't have predicted in 1988. And the sheer consistency of his story across hundreds of interviews spanning 2 decades is difficult to explain if he was simply making it all up. There's also the question of what the Navy was actually doing in 1943. Declassified documents confirm that experiments involving electromagnetic fields and degaussing technology were indeed conducted on naval vessels during World War II. The goal was to make ships invisible to magnetic mines. Could one of these experiments have gone wrong in ways the government has never admitted? Could the energy fields have interacted with space and time in ways scientists didn't anticipate? Al Bialik died in 2011, taking whatever truth he possessed with him. The Navy maintains that the Philadelphia experiment never happened, but the story continues to fascinate researchers and conspiracy theorists alike. So, what really occurred aboard the USS Eldridge in 1943? Was it simply a failed military experiment that the government covered up? Or did something far more extraordinary take place? Something that tore a hole in time and sent sailors hurtling into the future? And if Al Bialik truly experienced 2137 and 2749, what does his vision of humanity's future mean for all of us? Is that the world we're heading toward? A thought that is as fascinating as it is deeply unsettling. In January 2003, the FBI allegedly detained a man named Andrew Carlson on suspicion of insider trading. His crime? Turning $800 into $350 million through a series of stock trades that were statistically impossible. Every single trade he made was perfect. High-risk investments that should have failed instead generated massive returns. When interrogated, Carlson reportedly made a stunning confession. He claimed to be a time traveler from the year 2256, who had come back to make money using his knowledge of future market movements. He offered to provide information about the location of Osama bin Laden and a cure for AIDS in exchange for his release. Then, just as suddenly as the story appeared in news outlets, it vanished. The SEC claimed they had no record of anyone named Andrew Carlson. The FBI denied involvement. The original news source retracted elements of the story. Some say it was all a hoax, but others point out that the story's sudden and complete disappearance from public record is exactly what you would expect if someone powerful wanted it buried. What really happened to Andrew Carlson, and where or when is he now? To understand just how impossible Carlson's trading record was, you need to understand how Wall Street works. In January 2003, the stock market was in chaos. The dot-com bubble had burst, companies were collapsing. Even the most seasoned traders were losing millions. Making money in that environment required either incredible luck or insider knowledge. Making $350 million from an initial investment of just $800 required something else entirely. It required knowing exactly what was going to happen before it happened. And that's exactly what caught the attention of federal investigators. The story first broke through Yahoo News and quickly spread across multiple outlets. According to the reports, Carlson had executed 126 high-risk trades over a 2-week period. Every single one of them was profitable. Not most of them, not the majority, every single trade. The statistical probability of that happening by chance is essentially zero. We're talking about odds so astronomical that mathematicians couldn't even calculate them. Investigators were convinced he had access to insider information. There was simply no other explanation, or so they thought. Now here's where it gets absolutely insane. When questioned, Carlson reportedly didn't try to hide anything. He didn't claim luck or skill or even illegal connections. Instead, he calmly explained that he was a time traveler from the year 2256. He said he had traveled back to 2003, specifically to take advantage of his knowledge of historical market movements. In his time, he explained, the financial records of this era were well documented. He knew exactly which stocks would rise and which would fall, because for him, it was ancient history. Pretty wild, right? But Carlson didn't stop there. Perhaps sensing that no one believed him, he reportedly offered proof, his claims. He said he would reveal the location of Osama bin Laden, who at that time was still the most wanted man in the world. He offered to provide a cure for AIDS. He even mentioned future inventions that he could describe in detail. All he wanted in exchange was his freedom and permission to return to his time machine, which he claimed was hidden somewhere in the city. Investigators apparently thought he was either insane or running an elaborate con. They refused his offer. And then came the part that still haunts researchers to this day. Carlson was reportedly held on $1 million bail awaiting trial. A mysterious unidentified person posted his bail. And then Andrew Carlson simply vanished. Not a single trace, no court appearance, no forwarding address, no record of him leaving the country. When journalists tried to follow up on the story, they hit a wall of denials. The SEC said they had no case file on anyone named Carlson. The FBI claimed no involvement. The original news outlets began retracting elements of their coverage, claiming the story had originated from a satirical source. Skeptics point to this as proof that the entire story was a hoax from the beginning, possibly originating from a tabloid or comedy website that got picked up as real news. And they may be right. But think about this for a moment. If a time traveler really did get caught and was about to expose something that could change history, wouldn't you expect exactly this kind of response? A complete scrubbing of records, official denials from every agency, the story dismissed as fiction. Some researchers have tried to dig deeper. They've searched court records, financial databases, and immigration files. Absolutely no one has ever found any documentation proving Andrew Carlson existed. But they've also found no documentation proving the story was definitively debunked. It exists in a strange liminal space, too detailed to dismiss entirely, but too unverifiable to accept. So, what really happened in January 2003? Was Andrew Carlson a clever hoax that fooled multiple news organizations? Was he a con artist who got lucky and made up an absurd story to explain his success? Or was he exactly what he claimed to be? A man from the future who made one critical mistake, as underestimating how suspicious a perfect trading record would appear. And if he really was from the year 2256, did he make it back to his own time? Is he there right now, laughing at how close he came to getting caught? Or perhaps the most unsettling possibility of all, what if there are other time travelers among us right now? Ones who have learned from Carlson's mistake and are much more careful about not drawing attention to themselves. In 1928, Charlie Chaplin premiered his film, The Circus, at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Footage from that day captured crowds of people walking past the camera, preserved forever on film. For decades, no one noticed anything unusual. Then, in 2010, filmmaker George Clark was reviewing the footage and spotted something that stopped him cold. A woman walks past the camera holding something to her ear, appearing to speak into it. She's clearly engaged in conversation, reacting and responding to something only she can hear. The object she holds is compact and rectangular, held exactly as someone would hold a mobile phone today. But mobile phones did not exist in 1928. There was no technology even remotely similar. Some skeptics suggested it might be an early hearing aid, but hearing aids from that era were large trumpet-shaped devices, nothing like what appears in the footage. The clip has been analyzed countless times, and no satisfactory explanation has ever been found. So, who was this woman, and what exactly was she talking into? The premiere of The Circus was a massive event in 1920s Hollywood. Charlie Chaplin was the biggest star in the world, and Grauman's Chinese Theater was the most glamorous venue in the film industry. Cameras were positioned outside to capture the spectacle, filming celebrities and ordinary people alike as they arrived for the premiere. This behind-the-scenes footage was included in the DVD release of the film decades later as bonus material. For over 80 years, countless people watched this footage without noticing anything strange. It took a filmmaker with a careful eye to spot the anomaly that would send shockwaves through the internet. George Clark was preparing a presentation about Charlie Chaplin when he noticed the mysterious figure. He watched the clip again and again, unable to believe what he was seeing. In October 2010, he uploaded a video to YouTube pointing out the anomaly and asking viewers for their explanations. The video went viral almost immediately, accumulating millions of views within days. People around the world watched in disbelief as a woman from 1928 appeared to casually talk on a cell phone nearly a century before they were invented. Now here's where it gets even more fascinating. When you watch the footage closely, the woman's behavior is unmistakable. She's not just holding an object to her ear, she's actively talking, her lips are moving. Her facial expressions change as if she's responding to whoever is on the other end of the conversation. She even appears to smile at one point, as if amused by something being said to her. This isn't someone scratching their ear or adjusting their hat. This is someone engaged in a two-way conversation using a handheld device. In 1928, absolutely insane. The skeptics immediately went to work trying to debunk the footage. The most popular explanation was that she was holding an early portable hearing aid. Companies like Western Electric and Siemens had developed compact hearing devices by the late 1920s. But there's a major problem with this theory. Those early hearing aids were still bulky devices that required separate battery packs worn on the body. They didn't look anything like the slim rectangular object in the woman's hand. And more importantly, hearing aids are for listening, not talking. They don't explain why her lips are clearly moving as if she's speaking to someone. Other skeptics suggested she might be holding an ice pack to her face, perhaps nursing a toothache. Some proposed it could be a compact mirror or even a small clutch purse. But none of these explanations account for the full picture. Why would someone talk animatedly into a compact mirror? Why would holding an ice pack cause you to have a conversation with yourself while walking down a public street? Every alternative explanation falls apart when you actually watch the footage and observe her behavior. Think about this for a moment. If a time traveler found themselves in 1928, what's the one thing they might do without thinking? They might reach for their phone out of pure habit. It's such an ingrained behavior for us now that we don't even realize we're doing it. Could this woman have made exactly that mistake? Did she forget for just a moment that she was in the wrong era, instinctively answering a call before realizing where she was? To this day, no one has identified the woman in the footage. No one knows her name, where she came from, or what she was holding. The original film has been analyzed frame by researchers, special effects experts, and skeptics alike. Not a single person has provided a definitive explanation that accounts for everything we see. The mystery remains completely unsolved. So what do you believe? Was this simply a woman with some forgotten 1920s gadget that coincidentally looks and functions exactly like a modern smartphone? Was she testing some secret prototype technology that was never released to the public? Or was she someone who didn't belong in 1928 at all? Someone who slipped up for just a few seconds and was accidentally immortalized on film? And if time travelers can be caught on camera once, how many other pieces of historical footage contain secrets we haven't noticed yet? Are you ready for things to get even more disturbing? Because we're only halfway through, and the cases that follow are on another level entirely. In the 1960s, an Italian priest named Father Pellegrino Ernetti made an extraordinary claim that would shake the foundations of science and religion alike. He said that he and a team of scientists, including the famous physicist Enrico Fermi, had built a device capable of viewing any moment in history. They called it the chronovisor. Unlike a time machine that physically transports a person, the chronovisor functioned like a television that could tune into the past. Ernetti claimed to have witnessed the crucifixion of Christ, the destruction of ancient Rome, and countless other historical events. He even produced a photograph he said was taken of Jesus on the cross, captured directly through the device. The Vatican allegedly confiscated the chronovisor, deeming it too dangerous for humanity to possess. Ernetti maintained his story until his death in 1994, though some say he recanted on his deathbed, while others insist he never wavered. If the chronovisor was real, the implications are staggering. A machine that can view any moment in time would be the most powerful technology ever created. So, was Father Ernetti telling the truth? And if so, where is the chronovisor now? Father Pellegrino Ernetti was not some eccentric conspiracy theorist living on the fringes of society. He was a Benedictine monk, a respected biblical scholar, and a professor of music at the prestigious Benedetto Marcello Conservatory in Venice. He was also an expert in pre-polyphonic music, considered one of the foremost authorities on ancient musical forms. This was a man with credentials, reputation, and everything to lose by making outlandish claims. And yet, starting in the 1960s, he began telling close colleagues about a secret project he had participated in. A project that had successfully built a machine capable of viewing the past. According to Ernetti, the chronovisor was developed by a team of 12 scientists working in secrecy. Among them, he claimed, was Enrico Fermi, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who had helped develop the first nuclear reactor. Also allegedly involved was Wernher von Braun, the German rocket scientist who would later lead NASA's Apollo program. Ernetti never fully explained how the device worked, but he described it as capturing light and sound waves that had been imprinted in the environment. The theory was that every event leaves behind residual traces of electromagnetic energy. The chronovisor could supposedly decode these traces and reconstruct the original scenes, allowing viewers to witness history as it actually happened. Now, here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Ernetti claimed to have used the device to witness some of the most significant moments in human history. He said he watched the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He observed ancient Roman theatrical performances, including a lost play by the playwright Quintus Ennius that scholars had believed was gone forever. He even transcribed portions of the play's dialogue, providing text that no living human could have known. But the most stunning claim of all was that he had witnessed the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Ernetti said he watched as Jesus was nailed to the cross and heard his final words in their original Aramaic. Extremely creepy to even imagine, right? And then came the photograph. In 1972, an Italian magazine published an image that Ernetti claimed was captured directly through the chronovisor. It showed the face of Jesus on the cross, his expression one of profound suffering. The image sent shockwaves through the religious community. Here, allegedly, was the first genuine photograph of Christ himself, captured through technology that could peer backward through time. But then something happened that threw everything into question. Skeptics quickly discovered that the photograph bore a striking resemblance to a wooden crucifix sculpture located in a church in Perugia, Italy. The angles, the expression, the positioning of the head matched almost exactly. Critics argued this proved Ernetti had fabricated the entire story. The photograph wasn't from the crucifixion, it was simply a picture of a statue, but supporters pointed out that perhaps the sculptor had somehow accessed the same vision that Ernetti saw, or that the resemblance was simply coincidental. The debate has never been resolved. What makes this case even more intriguing is what allegedly happened to the device itself. According to multiple sources, the Vatican intervened and confiscated the chronovisor, hiding it away in the deepest vaults beneath the Holy See. Church officials supposedly determined that the technology was too dangerous for humanity. Imagine the chaos if anyone could view any moment in history. Political secrets would be exposed, religious foundations could be shattered or confirmed. No one's private moments would ever truly be private. The power to see everything that has ever happened would fundamentally change human civilization. Perhaps the Vatican decided that some knowledge is simply too dangerous to possess. Father Ernetti died in 1994, and reports about his final days are conflicting. Some sources claim he confessed on his deathbed that the photograph was a fabrication, an attempt to provide proof that backfired. Others insist he never recanted and went to his grave, maintaining that the chronovisor was real. Those close to him say he remained tormented by what he had seen, particularly the crucifixion, which haunted him for the rest of his life. Not a single person has ever come forward to confirm the existence of the device or the team that built it. So, what really happened in those secret laboratories? Did Father Ernetti and a team of brilliant scientists actually construct a window into the past? Is the chronovisor sitting right now in a hidden Vatican vault, waiting to be used again? Or was this all an elaborate deception by a man who craved attention, manufactured from imagination and a photograph of a statue? And perhaps the most unsettling question, if the Vatican truly does possess a machine that can view any moment in history, what have they seen? What secrets about our past are they keeping from the world? a thought that is as fascinating as it is deeply disturbing. In the heart of Liverpool, England, there is a street where people have reported slipping through time itself. Bold Street has been the site of dozens of documented cases where ordinary people suddenly found themselves in the past, witnessing the street as it appeared decades earlier, complete with old shops, vintage cars, and people dressed in period clothing. In one of the most famous cases from 1996, a police officer named Frank was shopping with his wife when he stepped into a bookstore and found himself transported back to the 1950s. The store had transformed into a women's clothing shop called Cripps that had closed decades before. People around him wore clothing from another era. A young woman in 1950s dress looked at him with confusion. When he stumbled back outside, he was in the present again. His wife had noticed nothing unusual. Frank's case is just one of many. Something about Bold Street seems to cause these temporal anomalies. Some believe ley lines intersect beneath the street. Others think residual energy from Liverpool's intense wartime bombing created weaknesses in time itself. But whatever the cause, the time slips continue to this day. Could you walk down a street and accidentally slip into the past? Bold Street sits in the center of Liverpool's shopping district, a bustling pedestrian area filled with modern stores, cafes, and thousands of people going about their daily lives. On the surface, it looks like any other high street in Britain, but beneath that ordinary appearance lies something deeply strange. For over a century, people have reported inexplicable experiences on this particular stretch of pavement. They describe sudden shifts in atmosphere, moments where the modern world simply vanishes and is replaced by scenes from decades past. These aren't ghost sightings or vague feelings of unease. These are full sensory experiences where witnesses interact with a different time period entirely. The case of the off-duty police officer, known only as Frank, remains one of the most detailed and credible accounts. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in July 1996. Frank and his wife Carol had come into the city center to do some shopping. While Carol went into a store on Dillon's bookshop, Frank decided to browse separately and headed toward what he believed was the bookstore entrance. But the moment he stepped through the door, everything changed. The bookshop was gone. In its place was a women's clothing store with wooden fixtures and old-fashioned displays. The name above the door read Cripps. Frank stood frozen, trying to understand what he was seeing. The people inside the store were dressed in clothing from the 1940s or 1950s. A young woman behind the counter stared at him with visible confusion, clearly startled by his modern appearance. Outside the windows, he could see vintage cars driving past and pedestrians in period attire. The entire street had transformed. Frank described feeling disoriented but completely lucid. This wasn't a dream. He was standing in another era, breathing its air, hearing its sounds. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Frank panicked and rushed back toward the exit. As he pushed through the door and stumbled onto the street, the modern world snapped back into place. Bold Street was once again filled with contemporary shops, modern cars, and people in 1996 clothing. His wife Carol was standing nearby, having just exited the real Dillon's bookshop. She had noticed nothing unusual. For her, only moments had passed, but Frank was shaken to his core. He later researched the history of the building and discovered that a women's clothing shop called Cripps had indeed operated on that exact spot, but it had closed in the 1950s. Absolutely baffling. Frank's experience might seem unique, but it's actually one of many. Researcher Tom Sleman has documented dozens of similar cases on Bold Street spanning multiple decades. In another incident, a young couple walking down the street in 2006 suddenly found themselves surrounded by 1960s vehicles and shops that had long since been demolished. They could hear music from that era playing from somewhere nearby. The experience lasted nearly a minute before reality shifted back. In yet another case, a woman reported stepping into a cafe that transformed into a wartime canteen filled with soldiers in uniform. Every witness describes the same thing: a sudden, complete transition into a past version of Bold Street that feels entirely real. What could possibly explain these phenomena? Some researchers point to the concept of ley lines, invisible channels of Earth energy that ancient civilizations supposedly built monuments along. Bold Street may sit at an intersection of these lines, creating a hotspot for temporal disturbances. Others suggest that Liverpool's intense bombing during World War II released enormous amounts of energy that somehow weakened the fabric of time in this location. A more scientific theory proposes that certain atmospheric conditions combined with the street's unique architecture could create optical and psychological effects that trigger vivid hallucinations. But none of these explanations account for the historical accuracy of what witnesses describe, details they could not have known. Think about this for a moment. These aren't tourists looking for something spooky. These are ordinary people, including police officers and professionals who had no prior knowledge of Bold Street's reputation. They walked into shops that transformed before their eyes and encountered people from another era who seemed just as surprised to see them. Some witnesses reported that people in the past stared at their modern clothing with confusion, as if they could see the time travelers too. So, what is really happening on Bold Street? Is there a tear in the fabric of time running through the center of Liverpool, a doorway that occasionally swings open, allowing people to glimpse or even enter the past? And if ordinary people can accidentally slip through time while doing something as mundane as shopping, how many time slips have occurred that no one ever reported? How many people have walked through a door and found themselves somewhere, or somewhen, else entirely? And perhaps the most unsettling question, if you can slip into the past without warning, is it possible to get stuck there, to walk through a doorway and never find your way back? In April 2006, a young man was found wandering the streets of Kyiv, Ukraine, looking completely disoriented and confused by his surroundings. He was dressed in clothing that appeared decades out of date and carried an old-style camera and Soviet-era identification documents. When police questioned him, he gave his name as Sergei Ponomarenko and his birth year as 1932. The documents confirm this, but here was the impossibility. Sergei looked no older than 25, and he insisted the year was 1958. He claimed to have been walking through Kiev on a normal day in 1958 when he saw a strange object in the sky. He photographed it. Then everything changed, and he found himself in 2006. The photographs in his camera, when developed, showed Kiev exactly as it appeared in 1958, including streets and buildings that had been demolished decades ago. Psychiatrists who examined him found him to be completely sane and genuinely terrified. Then, just as mysteriously as he had appeared, Sergei vanished from the hospital. Some say he returned to his own time. Others say he was silenced. The case remains one of Ukraine's strangest unsolved mysteries. The story begins on a busy afternoon in central Kyiv. Pedestrians going about their daily routines noticed a young man standing in the middle of a crowded intersection, staring at the buildings around him with an expression of pure disbelief. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't injured. He simply looked utterly lost, as if he had woken up in a foreign country without any memory of how he got there. When concerned citizens approached him, he asked questions that made no sense. He wanted to know what had happened to certain buildings. He asked where specific shops had gone. He seemed genuinely confused about the cars on the street and the clothing people were wearing. Someone eventually called the police. When officers arrived, they found Sergei cooperative but deeply distressed. He handed over his documents without hesitation. His internal passport, a standard Soviet identification document, listed his name as Sergei Ponomarenko, born in 1932. Everything about the document appeared authentic, down to the paper quality and official stamps. But the style of the passport hadn't been used in decades. It was a relic from Soviet-era Ukraine. And here's what made investigators freeze. According to the document, Sergei should have been 74 years old in 2006. The man standing in front of them looked no older than 25. Now, here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Sergei told police that the last thing he remembered was walking through Kiev on an ordinary afternoon in 1958. He had been taking photographs with his Yashica camera when he noticed something strange in the sky. It was a bell-shaped object, hovering silently above the buildings. Intrigued, he raised his camera and snapped a picture. The moment he pressed the shutter, everything around him changed. The buildings shifted, the streets transformed. People in strange clothing appeared everywhere. He had no idea where he was or what had happened. He was 25 years old, and for him, it was still 1958. The police didn't know what to make of his story. They sent Sergei to a psychiatric facility for evaluation, assuming he was either mentally ill or running some kind of elaborate scam. But the psychiatrist who examined him, a woman named Dr. Pavlovna, according to reports, found something unexpected. Sergei showed no signs of mental illness. His cognition was sharp. His memories were consistent and detailed. He could describe 1958 Kiev with remarkable accuracy, including street names, shop locations, and architectural details that matched historical records. He wasn't delusional. He was genuinely terrified and completely sincere in his belief that he had somehow traveled through time. But then came the evidence that sent chills down everyone's spine. Investigators developed the film in Sergei's vintage Yashica camera. The photographs showed Kiev exactly as it had looked in 1958. Streets that had been widened were narrow. Buildings that had been demolished stood intact. And there, in one frame, was the bell-shaped object Sergei had described, hovering impossibly in the sky above the city. The photographs couldn't have been faked easily. The film itself was old stock from the 1950s, no longer in production. The chemical composition matched that era precisely. Either someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create an elaborate hoax, or those photographs were genuinely taken in 1958 and brought forward through time. Skeptics have tried to explain the case as a viral marketing stunt or an elaborate hoax designed to attract attention. Some point out that the story circulated primarily through Ukrainian media and internet forums, making verification difficult. Others suggest that Sergei could have been a mentally ill man who obtained vintage documents and equipment, creating an identity that felt real to him. But none of these explanations account for the photographs. None of them explain how someone could capture images of buildings that no longer existed using film that hadn't been manufactured in decades. And none of them explain what happened next. After several days of observation, Sergei Ponomarenko vanished from the psychiatric facility. He didn't escape through a window or walk out the door. According to hospital staff, he was simply gone. His room was empty. No security footage captured him leaving. No witnesses saw him in the hallways. He disappeared as completely as he had appeared, without a single trace. Some believe he found a way back to 1958, returning to his own time through whatever strange phenomenon had brought him to 2006. Others think government authorities quietly removed him, erasing evidence of something they didn't want the public to know about. The truth remains unknown. So, what really happened to Sergei Ponomarenko? Did a young man from 1958 genuinely stumble through a portal in time after photographing an unidentified flying object? Did he spend several terrifying days in a future he couldn't comprehend before somehow finding his way home? Or is there a more mundane explanation that no one has yet uncovered? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, if photographing something strange in the sky can tear you out of your own time, how many other people have vanished the same way, lost forever between eras with no one left who remembers they ever existed? If you're getting chills right now, that's completely understandable. But we're not done yet. The next few cases are going to leave you speechless. For over 300 years, one man appeared again and again throughout European history, never aging, always mysterious, and always possessing knowledge he could not possibly have. He called himself the Count of Saint-Germain, and those who met him were convinced he was not entirely human. In the 1740s, he appeared in French high society as a brilliant musician, artist, and alchemist. He spoke every major language flawlessly and claimed to have witnessed historical events from centuries past. When asked his age, he would smile and say he had stopped counting. Those who knew him remarked that he never ate in public and seemed to possess an elixir that preserved his youth. He was seen in France in 1758, Russia in 1762, and Germany in 1779. His death was recorded in 1784. But then reports of him continued. He was allegedly seen at the French Revolution in 1789 and at a Masonic meeting in 1821. Sightings continued throughout the 1900s. Was Saint-Germain an immortal, a time traveler moving through history at will, or something else entirely? His true identity has never been confirmed, and some believe he walks among us still. The Count of Saint-Germain first appeared in the historical record in the early 1740s when he arrived in Paris and immediately captivated the French aristocracy. Nobody knew where he came from. He claimed noble lineage but refused to provide specifics. What people did know was that he was extraordinarily talented. He played the violin like a master. He painted works that rivaled the great artists. He spoke French, German, English, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and several Asian languages with native fluency. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of history, chemistry, and the occult sciences. King Louis XV was so fascinated by him that he provided Saint-Germain with a private laboratory in the royal Château de Chambord. The king's own mistress, Madame de Pompadour, became one of his closest confidants. This was no ordinary charlatan. This was a man who moved in the highest circles of European power. But here's what made people truly uneasy. Saint-Germain spoke about historical events as though he had personally witnessed them. He described details of meetings between kings and queens from centuries past, conversations that had never been recorded. When questioned, he would simply smile mysteriously. His valet, when asked how old his master was, reportedly replied that he didn't know, but that Saint-Germain had been in his service for over 300 years and looked exactly the same as the day they met. Whether this was a joke or something more disturbing, nobody could say. People also noticed that the Count never ate in public. At lavish dinner parties, he would sit and converse brilliantly while his plate remained untouched. He claimed to subsist on a special elixir of his own creation. An elixir, some whispered, that had granted him eternal life. Now, here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Throughout the mid-1700s, Saint-Germain appeared in multiple European countries, sometimes in places so far apart that travel between them would have been impossible in the time available. He was documented in France in 1758, negotiating secret diplomatic missions for the king. In 1762, he surfaced in Russia, reportedly involved in the plot that brought Catherine the Great to power. By 1774, he was in Germany, meeting with Frederick the Great, who later described him as a man who could not die. Everywhere he went, he demonstrated impossible knowledge and impossible youth. And then, in 1784, official records state that the Count of Saint-Germain died in the German town of Eckernförde, while in the care of Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. His death was recorded. His story should have ended. But then came the sightings that froze historians cold. In 1789, just 5 years after his supposed death, multiple witnesses reported seeing Saint-Germain in Paris during the early days of the French Revolution. He allegedly warned Marie Antoinette of the coming danger, urging her to flee the country. She didn't listen. In 1821, he was reportedly seen at a Masonic gathering in Paris, looking exactly as he had decades earlier. Throughout the 1800s and into the 1900s, credible witnesses continued to report encounters with a man matching his description, speaking with the same encyclopedic knowledge, displaying the same mysterious smile. Some even claimed to have photographed him in the early 20th century. Pretty insane, right? Skeptics argue that Saint-Germain was simply a skilled con artist who cultivated an air of mystery to advance his social position. They suggest the later sightings were cases of mistaken identity or people seeking attention by claiming to have met the famous immortal. The death record exists, they point out. He died like any other man. But this explanation doesn't account for how one person could have mastered so many languages, so many arts, and so many sciences in a single lifetime. It doesn't explain the diplomatic missions entrusted to him by kings who were notoriously suspicious of outsiders, and it certainly doesn't explain the verified sightings that continued for over a century after his recorded death. Think about this for a moment. What if Saint-Germain wasn't immortal in the traditional sense? What if he was a time traveler, moving through different eras at will, appearing throughout history because he could choose when and where to exist? That would explain his impossible knowledge of past events. That would explain why he never aged. That would explain why he kept appearing in different centuries without ever dying. For a time, traveler jumping from 1758 to 1821 to 1900 wouldn't be living for centuries. It would simply be choosing different destinations. To this day, absolutely no one has been able to definitively identify who the Count of Saint-Germain really was. No birth record has ever been found. No family has ever claimed him. His origins remain as mysterious as his apparent immortality. Some occult traditions teach that Saint-Germain was an ascended master, a spiritual being who transcended physical death. Others believe he discovered the true secret of alchemy, the ability to transmute not just metals, but time itself. So, What was the Count of Saint-Germain? A brilliant fraud who created history's most enduring mystery? An immortal being walking through the centuries among ordinary humans? Or a time traveler who has been visiting different eras throughout history, observing humanity's progress from a perspective none of us can imagine? And here's the question that truly haunts researchers. If he has been appearing throughout history for over 300 years, is he still out there right now? Could you pass him on the street tomorrow without ever knowing you had just walked past someone who witnessed the French Revolution, dined with Catherine the Great, and warned Marie Antoinette of her fate? A thought that is as fascinating as it is deeply unsettling. In 1921, a Swiss-Austrian teacher named Paul Amadeus Dienach fell into a coma that lasted 1 full year. When he awakened, he told doctors something that would haunt researchers for decades. He claimed that during his coma, his consciousness had traveled to the year 3906. For an entire year, he lived as another person in a future civilization, experiencing their culture, their technology, and their history. After recovering, Dienach spent his remaining years writing everything down in a diary containing thousands of pages of detailed descriptions. He described a future humanity that had evolved beyond war and greed. He wrote of a transformative event called the Great Spiritual Renaissance that would change human consciousness forever. He detailed technologies we're only beginning to approach today. Before his death in 1924, Dienach gave his diary to a student named George Papachatzis, who eventually published it in Greek. The diary, known as Chronicles from the Future, contains information about events that would occur after Dienach's death, some of which have allegedly come true. Was Dienach's consciousness truly transported across time? And if so, what does the future hold for humanity? Paul Amadeus Dienach was born in Switzerland in 1884 and lived a quiet, unremarkable life as a language teacher. He suffered from poor health throughout his life, plagued by a weak constitution that made him prone to illness. In 1921, while living in Geneva, he contracted a severe case of encephalitis lethargica, the mysterious sleeping sickness that swept through Europe in the early 20th century. The illness put him into a deep coma that doctors believed would be fatal. His body lay motionless in a hospital bed for 12 months. His brain showed minimal activity. By all medical standards, he was barely alive. And yet, when he finally opened his eyes in 1922, something extraordinary had happened inside his mind. Dienach told his doctors that he had been fully conscious during the entire year of his coma, but not in his own body. His consciousness had somehow traveled nearly 2,000 years into the future and inhabited the body of a man named Andreas Northam in the year 3906. For 12 months, Dienach experienced life in this future world, learning their language, studying their history, and observing their civilization. The people of 3906 eventually realized that Andreas was hosting a consciousness from the distant past. Rather than being alarmed, they were fascinated. They became his teachers, showing him everything about how humanity had evolved and the major events that had shaped their world. Now, here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Dienach didn't just describe vague impressions of the future, he documented specific historical events that would occur between his time and the year 3906. He wrote about a global government that would eventually unite humanity after centuries of devastating wars. He described environmental catastrophes that would reshape continents. He detailed the colonization of Mars in the coming centuries. And he wrote extensively about something he called the Great Spiritual Renaissance, a transformative event that would occur around the year 3382, fundamentally changing human consciousness and unlocking abilities we can barely imagine today. According to Dienach, this event would mark the true beginning of human civilization, making everything before it seem like a dark age of ignorance and violence. The level of detail in Dienach's writings is staggering. He filled thousands of diary pages with descriptions of future technology, social structures, and philosophical concepts. He wrote about energy systems that drew power directly from the sun and the Earth's magnetic field. He described cities designed in harmony with nature, where disease had been eliminated and lifespans extended to hundreds of years. He documented a form of direct mental communication that had replaced much of spoken language. Pretty insane when you consider he was writing this in the 1920s, long before any of these concepts appeared in science fiction. Think about this for a moment. Dienach was a language teacher with no scientific background. He had no reason to fabricate such an elaborate story, especially one he kept mostly private during his lifetime. He didn't seek fame or profit from his experiences. He simply wrote everything down in his personal diary, as if documenting a journey he desperately didn't want to forget. When he gave the diary to his student George Papachatzis before dying of tuberculosis in 1924, he reportedly asked that it not be published during Papachatzis' lifetime. The diary remained hidden for decades until Papachatzis finally released it in Greek in 1979. It has since been translated into multiple languages and studied by researchers around the world. Skeptics argue that Dienach's visions were simply elaborate dreams or hallucinations produced by his damaged brain during the coma. They point out that people experiencing altered states of consciousness often have vivid experiences that feel completely real. The detailed nature of his visions, they suggest, reflects his own imagination rather than genuine time travel. But this explanation struggles to account for certain elements of his writings. Dienach described concepts and technologies that didn't exist in the 1920s and wouldn't be theorized for decades. Some researchers claim that certain predictions in his diary have already come true, though verifying these claims remains difficult. There's also the question of why Dienach's consciousness specifically traveled to 3906. According to his account, the people of that era explained that consciousness occasionally slips through time during near-death states, and that such visitors from the past were rare but not unknown to them. They had a name for this phenomenon and understood its mechanisms. For them, Dienach wasn't a miracle or a mystery. He was simply a traveler who had arrived through a natural process they had long since documented and understood. To this day, researchers continue to debate the authenticity of Dienach's diary. The original handwritten pages still exist, and analysis has confirmed they were written in the 1920s. But proving whether the contents represent genuine future knowledge or an elaborate fantasy remains impossible. The diary sits in a strange liminal space, too detailed to dismiss, but too extraordinary to accept without question. So, what really happened during Paul Amadeus Dienach's year-long coma? Did his consciousness genuinely travel almost 2,000 years into the future? Did he live as another person in a civilization so advanced that our current world would seem primitive to them? And if his visions were real, what does it mean for humanity's future? Are we truly heading toward a great spiritual renaissance that will transform our species forever? Or are we destined for the centuries of war and catastrophe he described first? And perhaps the most intriguing question of all, if consciousness can travel through time during near-death experiences, how many others have glimpsed the future and simply kept it to themselves? In 2004, pilots from the USS Nimitz encountered something off the coast of San Diego that defied every law of physics. A white, oval-shaped craft, nicknamed the Tic Tac, demonstrated flight capabilities that should be impossible. Instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic speeds with no visible propulsion, and the ability to transition seamlessly from air to water. What most people don't know is what happened next. According to testimonies that emerged years later, the object's movement patterns suggested something far stranger than mere advanced technology. The craft appeared to anticipate the pilot's movements before they made them, as if it knew what they would do before they did it. One theory that has gained traction among researchers is that the craft was not from another place, but from another time. Future technology advanced enough to travel through time would appear just as impossible to us as our technology would appear to someone from the 1800s. The Department of Defense has confirmed the incident occurred, but has offered no explanation. So, what was the Tic Tac? And could the future already be visiting us? The encounter took place on November 14, 2004, approximately 100 miles southwest of San Diego. The USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group had been tracking mysterious radar contacts for nearly 2 weeks. The objects appeared at 80,000 feet, far higher than any conventional aircraft could operate, then dropped to sea level in seconds. No sonic boom, no visible exhaust, nothing that matched any known technology on Earth. When Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich were dispatched to investigate, they had no idea they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of reality forever. As Fravor approached the coordinates, he spotted something hovering just above the ocean surface. The water beneath it was churning, as if something massive was submerged below. Then the white, oval-shaped object ascended rapidly and positioned itself directly across from his FA-18 fighter jet. Fravor described it as roughly 40 feet long, shaped like a tic-tac breath mint, with no wings, no windows, no visible propulsion system. It moved with impossible smoothness, as if the air offered it no resistance whatsoever. When Fravor attempted to intercept it, the object accelerated away so fast it seemed to simply vanish. It reappeared seconds later at their cap point, a predetermined rendezvous location that the object should have had no way of knowing. Pretty insane, right? Now here's where it gets even more disturbing. The object didn't just outmaneuver the pilots, it seemed to predict their actions. When Fravor moved left, the tic-tac had already repositioned to counter. When he descended, it matched his trajectory before he even completed the maneuver. Multiple witnesses described the same unsettling impression. This thing knew what they were going to do before they did it. Lieutenant Chad Underwood, who recorded the now famous FLIR video of the encounter, later said the object's movements seemed almost playful, as if it was toying with them while demonstrating capabilities beyond human comprehension. Think about this for a moment. How could any craft anticipate a pilot's decisions before they make them? There are only a few explanations. Either the object possessed some form of mind-reading technology, or it had access to information about the future. If a craft could move through time even slightly, jumping forward by seconds or minutes, it would always know what its pursuers were about to do. It would have already seen their maneuvers and positioned itself accordingly. To observers in the present, this would look exactly like what the Nimitz pilots described: impossible prediction, impossible speed, impossible knowledge. The time travel hypothesis also explains other baffling aspects of the encounter. The tic-tac showed no heat signature despite moving at speeds that should have generated enormous friction. It transitioned from air to water without any observable impact. It appeared and disappeared from radar, as if blinking in and out of existence. All of these characteristics match theoretical descriptions of what time displacement might look like. A craft moving through time might only partially exist in our temporal frame, explaining why it sometimes appeared solid and sometimes seemed almost translucent. Skeptics argue that the tic-tac could be classified military technology, perhaps a secret drone program using propulsion systems not yet revealed to the public. Others suggest sensor malfunctions or misidentification of natural phenomena. But Commander Fravor, a veteran pilot with thousands of flight hours, has repeatedly stated that nothing in our current technological understanding can explain what he witnessed that day. The Pentagon officially released the flyer footage in 2020 and confirmed its authenticity, but offered no explanation for what the object was or where it came from. Here's what makes the time travel theory particularly compelling. If humans do eventually develop time travel technology centuries from now, wouldn't they want to observe key moments in their own history? Military exercises, technological developments, pivotal events that shaped their civilization. The tic-tac's behavior wasn't aggressive. It didn't attack. It simply observed, demonstrated its capabilities when challenged, and departed when it chose to. That sounds less like an invasion and more like a research expedition. Scientists from the future studying their own past with technology we can't begin to comprehend. To this day, the USS Nimitz incident remains one of the most credible and well-documented encounters with an unidentified aerial phenomenon in history. Multiple trained military observers witnessed the same object. Advanced sensor systems recorded its impossible maneuvers. The Department of Defense has acknowledged it happened. And yet, absolutely no one can explain what it was. So what was the tic-tac that appeared off the coast of San Diego in 2004? Was it extraterrestrial visitors from a distant galaxy? A secret military project so advanced it seems like magic? Or was it something even more extraordinary? A craft from our own future, piloted by our descendants, observing a moment in history they already knew would happen because for them it already had. And if the future is already visiting us, what are they looking for? What do they know about our time that we don't? A thought that is as fascinating as it is deeply unsettling. Rudolf Steiner was an Austrian philosopher who, in the early 1900s, claimed to have accessed something called the Akashic Records, a cosmic repository containing every event that has ever occurred or ever will occur. Unlike physical time machines, Steiner said he could project his consciousness directly into the past or future and witness events firsthand. He described ancient civilizations that mainstream history doesn't acknowledge, including Atlantis and Lemuria. He spoke of future events with unsettling specificity. He described technologies that would emerge decades later, and societal changes that have since come to pass. What makes Steiner different from other claimed mystics is the staggering volume and consistency of his work. He gave over 6,000 lectures and wrote dozens of books, all drawing from what he claimed was direct temporal observation. Scientists dismissed him during his lifetime, but many of his descriptions of future developments have proven remarkably accurate. Was Steiner simply a visionary thinker? Or had he truly found a way to traverse time using nothing but his mind? And if consciousness can travel through time, what does that mean for our understanding of reality itself? Rudolf Steiner was born in 1861 in what is now Croatia and grew up in Austria. From an early age, he demonstrated exceptional intellectual abilities, excelling in mathematics, science, and philosophy. He earned a doctorate from the University of Rostock and edited the scientific works of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. This was not a fringe mystic living in isolation. This was a highly educated scholar who moved in respected academic circles. By his mid-30s, however, Steiner began speaking publicly about experiences that would define the rest of his life. He claimed he had developed the ability to perceive what he called the spiritual world, a dimension of existence that contained all knowledge across all time. Steiner described the Akashic Records as an infinite cosmic library existing outside physical space and time. Every thought ever conceived, every word ever spoken, every action ever taken was recorded there. But it wasn't just a record of the past. The Akashic Records also contained the future, events that hadn't occurred yet, but would unfold according to cosmic patterns. Steiner claimed he could enter a meditative state and access these records directly, observing history and future events as clearly as watching a film. He insisted this wasn't imagination or speculation. He was, in his words, actually seeing what had happened and what would happen. Now, here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Steiner didn't just make vague predictions like other supposed seers of his era. He described specific technologies and social developments with remarkable precision. In lectures from the early 1900s, he spoke of machines that would think for humans, devices that would transmit images across vast distances, and a future where humanity would become dependent on artificial systems for communication. He described something eerily similar to television decades before it was invented. He spoke of computers before the first electronic calculators existed. He warned of environmental destruction and climate changes that scientists wouldn't seriously discuss for another 70 years. Pretty insane when you consider the time period he was writing in, but Steiner went even further. He described ancient civilizations that supposedly existed before recorded history. He spoke of Atlantis not as myth, but as historical fact, describing its technology, its culture, and its eventual destruction. He wrote about Lemuria, an even older civilization that he claimed existed millions of years ago, on a continent now submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean. He described the spiritual and physical evolution of humanity across vast stretches of time, drawing from what he insisted were direct observations through the Akashic Records. Mainstream historians dismissed these claims as fantasy, but some researchers have noted strange parallels between Steiner's descriptions and unexplained archaeological anomalies that continue to puzzle scientists today. Think about this for a moment. Steiner gave over 6,000 documented lectures during his lifetime. He wrote more than 40 books and left behind 30 volumes of collected works. The sheer consistency across this massive body of work is extraordinary. He never contradicted himself. Details he mentioned in lectures decades apart aligned perfectly. If he was fabricating everything from imagination, maintaining that level of consistency would be nearly impossible. But if he was actually observing events through some form of temporal perception, the consistency makes perfect sense. He was simply describing the same reality from different angles. Skeptics argue that Steiner was simply an intelligent man with a powerful imagination who made educated guesses about future developments based on scientific trends of his time. They point out that many of his predictions were vague enough to be interpreted favorably in hindsight. The descriptions of ancient civilizations, they say, are pure mythology dressed up in scientific language. There's no physical evidence that Atlantis or Lemuria ever existed, but these explanations struggle to account for predictions that couldn't have been extrapolated from early 1900s knowledge. How did Steiner describe computing machines in 1916? How did he predict the specific environmental crises we face today? And how did he maintain such detailed consistency across thousands of lectures spanning decades? Steiner himself taught that accessing the Akashic records was not a unique gift, but a latent human ability that anyone could develop through proper training. He founded a movement called anthroposophy, dedicated to this spiritual development. Waldorf schools, biodynamic agriculture, and anthroposophical medicine all trace their origins to his teachings. Today, millions of people worldwide follow practices based on knowledge Steiner claimed to have gathered from his temporal journeys. Whether they realize it or not, they are applying information that allegedly came from direct observation of past and future events. To this day, researchers continue to study Steiner's works, cataloging his predictions and comparing them to actual developments. The accuracy rate is disturbing to those who want to dismiss him as a fraud. Not everything he predicted has come true, but enough has materialized to make complete dismissal intellectually dishonest. Something in his writings contains genuine insight into developments he could not have known through conventional means. So, what was Rudolf Steiner really accessing during his meditative states? Was he simply an exceptionally creative thinker whose imagination happened to align with future reality? Or had he genuinely found a way to send his consciousness through time, observing events across millennia as easily as we observe the present moment? And if the Akashic records truly exist, containing all knowledge of past and future, what would happen if more people learned to access them? Would we finally understand where we came from and where we're headed? Or are some truths too vast for humanity to handle? What you're about to hear is the case that haunts researchers to this day. This is number 1. In July 1954, a well-dressed businessman arrived at Tokyo's Haneda Airport on what should have been a routine trip. But when customs officials checked his passport, they discovered something that still has no explanation. The man's passport listed his country of origin as Taured, a nation that does not exist and has never existed on any map. When confronted, the traveler became confused and frustrated. He insisted Taured was a small country located between France and Spain, where he claimed Andorra sits on our maps. He said Taured had existed for over 1,000 years and produced documents including business cards, a driver's license, and bank statements, all from Taured-based institutions. Customs officials checked every map they could find. No Taured. They contacted the company he claimed to have a meeting with. The company existed but had no record of him. They called the hotel where he claimed to have reservations. No booking under his name. The man was detained overnight while officials tried to unravel the mystery. Security guards stood outside his door all night. But when morning came, the room was empty. The man from Taured had vanished without a trace, along with all his documents that had been locked in a secure cabinet. The door had never opened, the windows were sealed. It was as if he had never existed at all. Some believe the man slipped through from a parallel timeline where Taured is real. Others think he was a time traveler whose documents hadn't been updated for our version of history. But the most unsettling possibility is this. If someone can slip into our world from another timeline, how many times has it happened before? And how would we ever know? The incident began like any other day at Haneda Airport. Flights arrived from around the world. Passengers moved through customs showing their passports and declaring their belongings. The man in question appeared completely ordinary. He was Caucasian, middle-aged, well-groomed, and dressed in a quality business suit. He spoke fluent Japanese and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had traveled internationally many times before. He presented his passport to the customs officer with the casual ease of an experienced businessman. And that's when everything stopped making sense. The passport itself appeared completely authentic. It had the proper stamps, the correct formatting, and showed evidence of previous international travel. The man had visited Japan multiple times before, according to the visa stamps. But the country listed as his origin, Taured, simply did not exist. The customs officer called over supervisors. They examined the passport under magnification. They checked reference materials. They consulted with senior officials. Absolutely no one had ever heard of Torrid. When they questioned the man, he became visibly agitated. He pointed to a world map on the wall and indicated the small area between France and Spain, where Andorra is located. He insisted that's where Torrid was. He couldn't understand why they were pretending his country didn't exist. Now here's where it gets even more unsettling. The man wasn't just carrying a passport. He had an entire collection of documents supporting his identity. Business cards from a company in Torrid, a driver's license issued by Torrid, bank statements from Torrid financial institutions, currency from Torrid. Every piece of documentation was consistent and appeared genuine. Either this was the most elaborate hoax in history, complete with forged documents from a fictional country, or something far stranger was happening. The man himself seemed genuinely shocked that no one recognized his homeland. He wasn't nervous like a con artist caught in a lie. He was frustrated and confused, like someone experiencing a nightmare they couldn't wake from. Officials decided to hold him overnight while they investigated further. They booked him a room at a nearby hotel and posted 2 security guards outside his door. The room was on the 15th floor with windows that couldn't be opened. His passport and documents were locked in a secure cabinet in the airport's immigration office. There was absolutely no way for him to escape or retrieve his belongings. The guards remained at their posts all night, never leaving for even a moment. When officials arrived the next morning to continue questioning, the room was completely empty. The man had vanished. Think about this for a moment. The guards swore no one had entered or exited through the door. The windows remained sealed from the inside. There was no other way out of the room, and yet the man was gone. But that's not even the most disturbing part. When officials rushed to the immigration office to check on his documents, the secure cabinet was still locked. But when they opened it, every single piece of evidence was gone. The passport, the business cards, the driver's license, the bank statements, all of it had disappeared along with him. Not a single trace remained to prove he had ever existed at all. Skeptics have tried to dismiss this case as an urban legend, a story that grew more elaborate with each retelling. They point out that no official Japanese government records have been found confirming the incident. Some suggest it may have originated as a fictional anecdote that somehow became accepted as fact. But researchers who have investigated the case point to a troubling detail. Japanese government records from 1954 are notoriously incomplete, with many documents lost or destroyed over the decades. The absence of official records doesn't prove the event didn't happen. It only proves we can't verify it through normal channels. The parallel universe theory offers one explanation that makes this case absolutely fascinating. Physicists have long theorized that multiple versions of reality may exist simultaneously, each slightly different from the others. In one timeline, Andorra exists. In another, perhaps Torrid developed instead, occupying the same geographical space, but with a completely different history. If barriers between these parallel worlds occasionally become thin, it's possible that someone could slip through accidentally, finding themselves in a reality where everything they know has been erased or replaced. To this day, the man from Torrid has never been identified. No country ever claimed him as a missing citizen. No family ever reported him gone. Absolutely no one came forward to explain the elaborate hoax, if that's what it was. He appeared from nowhere, existed for a single day in our reality, and then vanished back into whatever dimension he came from, taking every piece of evidence with him. So, what really happened at Tokyo's Haneda Airport in July 1954? Did a man genuinely arrive from a parallel timeline where history unfolded differently? Was he a time traveler whose documentation belonged to a version of Earth that no longer exists or doesn't exist yet? Or did he somehow fall through a crack in reality, spending one terrifying day in a world where his entire country had been erased from existence? And here's the question that haunts everyone who studies this case. If one person can slip through from another timeline, it's almost certain that others have too. They might be living among us right now, people whose memories don't quite match our history, whose origins can't quite be traced. How many people walking our streets came from somewhere else, some other version of Earth? And if you woke up tomorrow in a world where your hometown had never existed, where no one recognized your name and no records proved you were real, would anyone believe you? Or would you simply vanish, just like the man from Torrid? And there you have it. 15 disturbing cases that challenge everything we think we know about time. From mysterious photographs showing technology that shouldn't exist, to travelers who appeared from eras and places that never were. These stories force us to ask one unsettling question. Is time really as solid as we believe? Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think time travel is possible? Which case fascinated you the most? Was it the man from Torrid, the Bold Street time slips, or maybe Rudolf Steiner's Akashic Journeys? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this video gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation. Thanks for watching, and remember, the next time something feels strange, you might just be glimpsing another time.